Say yes to new beginnings.
Yes.
Say yes to new standards of excellence.
Yes.
Say yes to engaging reportage with a difference.
Yes.
Introducing Yes International Magazine. The time to say yes to your dreams and aspirations is here.
Now, Prof, what is the greatest thing, that being a writer has done for you?
Being a writer, the greatest thing by far is again to bring me friends from all over the world. Friends from all over the world. I've always been gregarious. I've always been greedy for friendship, and so wherever I travel, I mean, I go to Italy to speak at a conference, and a group of students came to me and said, "Excuse me, are you? You look like Okey Ndibe." I said, "Yes, I am." They said, "Oh, we read your novel. Oh, we loved it." I received emails. I just received an email 2 days ago from somebody in Canada, and she said that she decided to read one book by an author from every country in the world, and she picked up my memoir from Nigeria. And she said, oh, she was enjoying it so much. She was on chapter 4, and she just wanted to write to me and say how much she was enjoying it. And she said, I have made her want to be a writer. So for me,
Wow.
that is far more than giving me $1 billion, trust me. So that friendship that you get, that, again, touching somebody's soul and enlarging it, is the biggest gift that writing has got to me. And I travel. I get to travel a lot, so I've always loved traveling. And I tell people that I live a dream because, I get invitations all over the world to come talk about literature, and it's a blessing.
Interesting. Now, what would you have wanted writing to do for you that it hasn't done yet?
I'm sorry.
Yes, I said, what would you have wanted writing to do for you that it hasn't done yet?
I can't think of any, really. I can't think of any. To bring me more readers, to bring me, somehow my books have not been as widely translated in other languages as I would like, and there's a history to that, which makes me sad because it could have been different. But the 2 times that I sold novels, I sold them without an agent. And so you need an agent to sell your work. So my novels, both of my novels have done exceedingly well, but I sold them without an agent. And it takes agents to sell your work in different languages. So that's a lesson I've learned. Luckily, I'm finishing work as we speak on editing a novel that I finished late last year. And so one of the expectations that I've told an agent that I've spoken to is that I want her to be able to sell a lot of rights. So I would say that that's the one thing. But again, I tell people that writing is a long race, right? So if you look at somebody like Dan Brown, who wrote Da Vinci Code, had written 2 or so novels before Da Vinci Code, which didn't sell much, but Da Vinci Code sold in excess of 20 million copies. And then the other novels, which hadn't sold much, now sold in 1 million or 2 million each, right? And so the way I look at it is to keep writing. Don't focus too much on whether this book has done well or whether it's giving you the kind of the quantity of readers that you would like, which in my case is I want all the world as my readers, right? But the important thing is to keep writing, okay? Sometimes it's after you pass on that people say, whoa, this novel is amazing, and everybody starts reading it, right? So part of the fame that comes from writing comes accidentally. If there are hundreds of thousands of people who, if they see a book in Obama's hands, will go and buy the book. Okay? Obama is photographed with a book. They go and buy the book. So it doesn't matter whether it's a good book or not, people who love Obama who want to read what he's reading, right? There are stars, Hollywood stars, musicians in the world who, if they hold up your book or they talk about your book, you become a bestseller. So anyway, so I don't worry about all those things. What I worry about is to do excellent work so that wherever literature is important, if somebody presents your novel, nobody holds their nose in disgust.
Interesting. Now, Prof, who is your favorite writer or author and why? Just one person. I know you read, even I can see the books behind you, but I just need one, your favorite. Yes, let's see.
I'm going to tell you why I won't say, okay? And the reason I won't say is that I have favorites for different reasons, okay? So anybody knows that I had a special relationship with Chinua Achebe, right? And I have read Things Fall Apart so many times that, you know, I can quote whole passages of it, right? And whenever I read it, I learn something new. Now, so I could say Chinua Achebe, right? But then those who know me also know I have a special relationship with Wole Soyinka, and Soyinka has done so much for me, and Soyinka has been so generous, not just in what our people think of generosity, but in terms of his ethical and moral example, in terms of his courage. So when I read his prison memoir, The Man Died, and Soyinka says, the man dies in all who keep silent in the face of tyranny. And elsewhere in the book, he says, justice is the first condition of humanity. Justice is the first condition of humanity. Those have become my guiding ethical lights. So I could say Wole Soyinka. Now, Ngugi wa Thiong'o for me is a total writer. And again, I'm very close to him. He's very generous to me. Ngugi is a writer who has excelled in so many different fields, in fiction, in the memoir, in poetry, even in music, in drama. And he's just a terrific person to know and to talk with, right? Whenever he and I attend a conference, we spend hours over breakfast, you know, maybe spend 2 or 3 hours at breakfast. Just it's for me, it's the biggest gift to just be in the presence of Ngugi, right? So I could say Ngugi wa Thiong'o. I could say Gabriel Garcia Marquez, whose novel 100 Years of Solitude, you know, just taught me a different way of telling stories. You understand? I could say Shakespeare. I could say, you know, so there are so many different
so many of them
authors that I could name. So I'm just going to say different authors have meant so much to me.
For different reasons. Yeah. All right. Before the legendary Professor Chinua Achebe died, we were quite close to him. What would you say was the greatest lesson you learned from him?
The greatest lesson that Achebe gave me was the absence of affectation in his life, that Achebe was real and organic. Achebe did not have two faces, so that when you are in private with him, you saw one face, and when he came out in public, Achebe was a totally organic man, so that when you read his work, the way that Achebe wrote his books is the way he spoke. and he spoke out of conviction. He didn't sit down and say, okay, let me dazzle people and give the impression that I'm an extraordinary intellectual. Because as Achebe said to me in one interview, that real expertise lies in being able to talk about a subject that you're an expert in such language that even lay people would understand you. That's real expertise. And that means a lot to me. So that my writing has not achieved that level of Achebean ethic of absolute accessibility. And that's what I'm straining for. Okay. So I have friends who want to strain for difficulty, and they think if people read my book and they don't understand it, then I'm big, I'm important. Achebe had a different ethic. And so they just to be a real human, without pretensions, without airs, and yet being self-possessed, knowing yourself. I think that's what Achebe gave to me above all.
All right. Now you also close to our Nobel laureate. That's talking about Professor Wole Soyinka. What would you say has also been the greatest lesson that you have learned from him?
The greatest lesson I've learned from Soyinka is his humanity. Excuse me. His humanity and his courage. Okay. It's become fashionable today for young people to be critical of Wole Soyinka, to say, hey, Buhari did something, you have not spoken. Why haven't you spoken? And what I say to them is that Wole Soyinka, in his late 20s, in his early 30s, had done things that our fathers did not dream of doing. And so when young people who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s are saying to Soyinka, go and do more. We didn't see you at a rally against Buhari, so you're a traitor. And meanwhile, they are sitting, as they are writing this, they're sitting in a joint, drinking their beers and chopping their pepper soup. I said, please, go and leave first. Go and do a fraction of what Soyinka has done before you criticize him. So his moral courage for me stands out. And also, people don't know this about him because he's a very private person, even though he takes on so many public roles. Soyinka is essentially likes his wine and his good food and just a tight company of perhaps solo writers, that's what gives him the greatest joy, right? So to be in that circle and to see how many writers Soyinka has helped without making any noise about it, okay? Even my career, the publication of my first novel, Soyinka found out that Heinemann, the UK, was considering the novel. He said, do you have an address for them? He sent them a letter saying, you will regret it if you don't publish this young man, because it's been a long time, it's been a while, he said, since I've sensed creative promise on this level. I met him at a university where he gave a talk during Abacha's regime. He was on exile. And I had taken my novel to the manuscript to give to him to read. But when I got there, I felt a sense of guilt. I said, this man is on exile for the second time in his life. He's traveling around the world denouncing Abacha and so on. And I'm going to foist my novel on him. So I said, no, I'm not going to do it. But when he finished talking and I went to him, he said, okay, you came. He hugged me and he said, one of your professors told me that you've written a fascinating novel. Can I get to read it? I said, oh, I happen to have a copy in my car. He said, no, don't give it to me here. I'm traveling. He said, send it to Emory University. I sent it to Emory University. On Christmas Day, Soyinka called me and said, okay, I've finished reading your novel, your manuscript. He said, this is highly evocative. And he said, I'm calling to congratulate you. That level of generosity, because he was drawn everywhere. He was in Australia today, in France the next day, in Germany the next day, in South Africa, speaking about Abacha. Okay, so for him to find time And it's not just done this for me, he's done this for so many people. There's a young woman that he spoke to me about that he's been mentoring. And just yesterday, she told me she's got full scholarship to come do her MFA at a university in the US. So the man's generosity is amazing. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. Now, what stamps Okey Ndibe out as a writer?
Oh boy. I would let that be the judgment of my critics and scholars who study my work. I don't want to jump in and sort of prejudice that conversation, but I can tell you what I try to do. That what I try to do is to write from a place of organicity. Okay, that I'm a student of, of Igbo culture, and when I say student, I mean in a literal sense. So when I go to my hometown or when I go to Nigeria, I'm a student of culture, period. But typically when I'm in my hometown, I go to elders. Okay, I go to elders and I pay a little school fee to them by giving them a little money or some gift. And I sit down with them and I ask them questions and I learn. Okay, so when you sit down with these elders, you find so much that is beautiful and that is poetic, that is elegant about your culture. You find this wellspring of moral values that animated Igbo life, okay, and still animated today. So that sort of investment, that sort of attempt to tease out this natal culture that produced me, a culture that I'm a student in, hopefully something that comes true. So I was speaking earlier about tragedy and my take on tragedy. So I tend to be drawn to tragic stories, but I write tragedy out of an Igbo and Nigerian temperament that insists that we have to laugh in the face of horror, right? A kind of defiant laughter, so that people find my novels very funny, even when I'm writing things that are sad. And so I don't know if that distinguishes me, but that's one element of my writing that I'm particularly fond of.
Interesting. Interesting. Now, what puts you off in a story?
What puts me off in a story is when it occurs to me that a writer has rushed a work, that there is a good story which a writer has done little or no justice, or perhaps done grave injustice to, because of a rush, because of indolence, because of a laziness. Okay, so sometimes you find excuse me. Sometimes you find a work that in reading it, you recognize the great potential in that story, but that potential has not been served by the writer. And this is work that perhaps would have taken another round of edits. This is work that could have been cut in half, but the author just loved heft and longevity, and so gave us something that will bore us to death. That I can't forgive in a writer.
Interesting. Now, what keeps you glued, to a story?
I would say a certain quirkiness in the voice of the writer. So when the writer's voice is different, when I'm seized, because there are stories that don't give you permission to leave. You want to leave, you want to go do something else, but you don't have that permission. You just stay with them, right? And often what happens there is that it's an intersection between a great voice, a great narrative voice, and also a kind of energy in the story itself. So you're hearing a great story, but the story is leavened by the beauty of the language. Okay, that keeps me riveted, and I like that in the rare writers. So there are a few novels that I've read in one day, right? Because truly you can't live it. I mean, that you are called to come and eat, and you don't want to leave the story to go and eat, right? You almost feel like you need the permission of the author to say, okay, can I keep this story down for a minute and go and eat food and come back? And usually there are writers who just have beautiful tons of phrases and also are telling you a story that in the end enlarge you. So you read a story and you wake up and you say, I'm a different person because I read that story. That sort of book.
Wow. Yeah. Now, of all the books that I have read, which one has left the most indelible mark?
Oh.
Just one book.
You see? I think you're sneaking back in the question you wanted me to answer before, which I deflected. So I'm going to tell you that Gilgamesh, okay? I'm going to tell you that Things Fall Apart, The Man Died, Mating Birds by Lewis Nkosi, A Grain of Wheat by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Hamlet by Shakespeare, that these are stories that have touched me deeply.
All right.
And there are a lot more.
I like that. Yeah. I like that. Now, Prof, what would be your advice to upcoming writers?
My advice to them? To upcoming writers?
Yes.
Okay. So my advice is read. Try and read a lot. Okay. Make a point of reading. Reading is essential. The other thing is make no excuses. Write. Okay. So I meet some people and they say to me, I want to write a book. Okay. I say, okay, write that book. There's no commission in the world. There's no Politburo that gives people permission. Okay, you've been given permission, go and start writing. So I'm saying that there's no tribunal that gives permission to people to write or withholds permission from writing. There are governments, that don't want, their citizens to write unless they are commissioned to write sort of hagiographies of the leader, of the misrulers, and so on. But often I just tell young people, be sure that what you want to do is not an act of vanity, that you are ready, that you have an important story to tell. And every human being has at least one, often several important stories to tell, right? So I say, once you have that sense that you have an important story to tell, go ahead and tell it. But be sure that you have the equipment, okay, to tell the story. And one way of having the equipment, I can't emphasize this enough, is to have a passion for reading. If you don't read, I'm afraid you're not going to be much of a writer.
All right. Now let me take the last question so that we can round off.
Okay.
Yes, Prof. When should we expect another book from you? How soon? When?
Okay. In a lot of ways, it's out of my hands, but I just finished a novel in August of last year. Give me a second. So I finished a novel in August of last year. I have been rewriting and re-editing that novel since August. I'm very close. I think I'm within a week or two of finishing with the edits. Then I'll send it out to my agent, who will then try to sell it to publishers. And excuse me. And so hopefully very soon, in the next year or so, people should know that it takes between a year and a year and a half after publishers acquire a book for them to bring it out. Okay, so when I tell people I'm finishing a novel, they think, oh, so in a month it's going to be out. I said, no, the earliest will be at least a year, okay, a year to a year and a half. But then the good thing is that I have other things that I'm working on. So, but for my Nigerian readers, finally, Bookcraft, which has published my second novel, Foreign Gods, Inc., as well as my memoir, Never Look an American in the Eye. And the original publishers of my book on Wole Soyinka called The Man Lives, a conversation with Wole Soyinka on life, literature, and politics. So Bookcraft is in the process of publishing my very first novel, Arrows of Rain, which in a lot of ways is my favorite book. So it's been missing in Nigeria. It was originally published by Heinemann in the UK. It became their best-selling novel in 12 years, but it's never really come into Nigeria in any substantial way, just a few copies here and there. But finally, Bookcraft is about to do an edition for Nigeria. So they should be going to press within the next 2 weeks. I'm actually just reading the proofs, which they sent to me to make sure that there are no mistakes. It looks beautiful, just the cover design and so on. And so that book should be in bookstores soon. I'm also thinking to come to Nigeria sometime later in the summer to maybe do a book tour once that book is available, to do a book tour featuring my book on Wole Soyinka and my first novel, which is coming out in Nigeria for the first time.
Wow. Wow. Now, Prof, you omitted the working title, for the new book. Would you like to share that with us? Or is that on the wrap?
That's actually something strange. Usually when I start a novel, I know the title. So my first novel, I knew it was Arrows of Rain. My second novel, I knew it was Foreign Gods, Inc. My memoir had a different title, working title. In fact, my publisher suggested Never Look an American in the Eye. This book has been so complex for me. When I started it, I gave it a working title, Native Tongues, okay? Because I had a certain conception of the story. That conception, the story took me in a different direction. So Native Tongues no longer works. I have been wrestling with so many different titles, but for now, the working title that I've given it is Acts Written on Water. Acts Written on Water. But I don't like it. So it's most likely going to change, but it's just something to keep me going so that I can finish the edits.
Wow. Prof, it's been, let me say, I would say that I feel honored, I feel privileged, I feel excited. I feel so happy, having you join me for this Instagram Live. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You've been a huge inspiration. In fact, getting me to, consenting to the interview, you didn't stress me. You made everything so simple, so easy for me. So I'm very, very grateful. Very, very grateful. I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you.
Well, Azuh,
thank you very, very much.
I really admire what you do, the contribution you're making in the cultural sector to bring literature and other ideas to your audience. And I think that these things are important, that the society in the end is renewed, not necessarily by its materialist compulsions, but by its investments in cultural ideas and products. So thank you for what you do, and it's been a delight to join you and those who've been able to join us. So have a blessed weekend.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir.